Right now, someone near you believes something you've probably also always believed, that a fish can't really feel pain, not the way you feel it, just a flinch, a reflex, nothing behind it. That one assumption shapes how we treat more animals than almost any other belief we hold. It might also be wrong. So let's start with the smallest possible question. Does a fish even have the hardware to feel pain at all? Start with the myth everyone already believes, that a fish has a 3-second memory, too simple a brain to hold on to much of anything. A researcher named Culum Brown spent years testing that claim directly, and found fish that remembered escape routes, tool use, and even individual faces of other fish for months. The 3-second memory was never real. It was a convenient story, one that made it easier not to ask harder questions about what a fish actually experiences. But pain is one of those harder questions. In 2003, a researcher named Lynne Sneddon went looking for an answer. She injected the lips of rainbow trout with bee venom and acetic acid, the same acid that would sting your own skin. What she found surprised almost everyone in the field. Rainbow trout have nociceptors, pain receptors, dozens of them, clustered right around the mouth and face, structurally almost identical to the ones in your own skin. Some of those receptors respond to heat, some to pressure, some specifically to chemical irritants, exactly the categories a mammal's pain receptors respond to. That alone doesn't prove suffering. A nociceptor can fire without anyone feeling a thing behind it. That's just wiring. So Sneddon kept watching. The injected trout rocked slowly from side to side, something healthy trout never do. They rubbed their lips against the gravel and the tank walls, over and over, the way you'd press a hand against a burn. They stopped eating. Some of them for most of a day. Then she gave a separate group of injected trout morphine, the same painkiller you'd get after surgery. The rocking stopped. The rubbing stopped. Within minutes, they were eating again. A reflex doesn't respond to morphine. Morphine works on exactly one thing, the conscious experience of pain. Separately, researchers running the same kind of test on zebrafish found something just as strange. Stressed, injured fish went pale, hid in the corners of the tank, and stopped exploring. The same cluster of behaviors researchers call anxiety-like in a mouse. Give those zebrafish an anti-anxiety drug, the same class prescribed to people, and the hiding stops. The exploring comes back. Not every scientist accepted that conclusion. A researcher named James Rose argued fish couldn't consciously suffer at all, because they lack a neocortex, the wrinkled outer layer of the brain we use to consciously register pain. No neocortex, he argued. No experience. Just wiring. Following its wiring, all the way down. For years, that argument won. Reflex, not suffering, became the default assumption in textbooks and in law. It was also conveniently the assumption that required nothing to change. Not in fishing, not in farming, not in how a fish is killed at the end of its life. But the deeper researchers looked, the harder that assumption got to hold onto. Fish injured once will avoid the exact location for months afterward. Not seconds, not minutes, months. That isn't a spinal reflex fading out. That's a memory, tied to something strong enough to permanently reroute behavior. Here's the test that convinced a lot of skeptics. Offer a fish the choice between a plain, boring tank and a more interesting one laced with a mild irritant. Healthy fish pick the interesting one anyway. Curiosity wins. Now offer an injured fish a painkiller, but only in the boring tank. The injured fish chooses boring and pain-free over interesting and painful every time. That's a trade-off. Reflexes don't make trade-offs. Only something with a stake in the outcome does. Researchers ran a version of the same test on zebrafish with a hollowed-out log to hide in, something fish naturally love. Injured fish would abandon the log entirely if pain relief was only available out in the open, exposed water. Choosing exposure over comfort, just to make the pain stop, is not the behavior of a machine following a script. And it isn't only fish. In 2021, the UK government commissioned a full review of the evidence on octopuses and crabs, animals so nervous system different from us that for decades almost nobody seriously asked the question. The review found both groups meet most of the same tests fish do. Nociceptors, long-term avoidance learning, trade-off behavior, measurable responses to pain relief. That same year, the UK legally reclassified both groups as sentient beings, an octopus, a crab, sentient on paper under British law. Part of that review leaned on work by a researcher named Robert Elwood, who found that hermit crabs given a small electric shock would abandon a perfectly good shell to avoid it, but only when the shock was strong enough to actually matter, weighing the cost of losing their armor against the cost of the pain itself. A crab, doing cost-benefit analysis on its own suffering, which puts fish, and animals like them, in an uncomfortable place for the rest of us. Roughly 100 billion fish are farmed every single year. 1 trillion more are pulled straight from the ocean. Almost none of it happens under anything close to the welfare standards we'd apply to a cow, or a pig, or a chicken. Not because anyone ever proved fish don't suffer. Because for most of history, almost nobody thought seriously enough to check. A few places have started to. Norway and parts of the EU now require fish to be stunned before slaughter, the same baseline welfare standard that's applied to a cow for decades already. It's a small policy, in one corner of one industry. It exists because the research finally forced a question, not because anyone found it convenient. So here's the actual disagreement still standing today. Almost no serious researcher argues fish don't respond to injury. Nobody's debating that part anymore. The real argument is about whether the lights are on behind the response. Whether there's something it's actually like to be a fish in pain. And that question runs headfirst into the same wall every animal consciousness question eventually hits. We can't climb inside another nervous system and check directly. Not a fish's, not a crab's, not, honestly, anyone else's but our own. What we can do is watch what an animal does when the alternative on offer is relief. And by that test, again and again, fish keep making the same kind of choice you would. That doesn't settle the philosophical question for good. It probably never will, not completely, not for any animal that can't simply tell us in words. But it moves the burden of proof somewhere new. It's no longer enough to assume an animal doesn't feel pain just because it can't scream the way we would. So go back to that assumption you walked in with. The one about the fish not really feeling it. This was never really about fish. It was about how cheap it is to assume something can't suffer, right up until somebody finally thinks to check. We did it with fish. We did it with octopuses and crabs. Historically, we did it with human infants too, assumed too undeveloped to consciously feel a surgeon's scalpel. An assumption medicine only abandoned in the 1980s. The pattern keeps repeating in the same order. Assume nothing's there, then find out the checking was the only thing missing. So the next time you catch, or farm, or plate something with gills, the question isn't whether it looked like it was in pain. It's whether you ever actually looked. Tell me which animal you think we've most wrongly assumed can't feel pain. Put it in the comments. Also, there's a single crab hidden somewhere in this video that never actually appeared in the UK's Sentience review. If you catch it, drop the timestamp below. One random person who gets it right, I'll announce the winner in the next video. And every study I mentioned today, Sneddon's trout experiments, the UK Sentience review, all of it, is linked in the description if you want to go deeper. Thanks for watching.